Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Coaches Corner University podcast. I'm your host, Paul O'Neid, and as usual, our podcast is sponsored by Coaches Corner University. You can visit www.coachescorneru.com. Use code podcast300 to save $300 off of our education collective. And you'll want to do it now because I'm changing the model of the website, adding a whole bunch of stuff, and all the new updates will be available to you if you purchase your lifetime membership. So that's code podcast300 for our education collective with almost 200 hours of continuing education lectures, as well as discounts on all of our CEU courses. We're also sponsored by TC Nutrition, Barefoot Shoes, and Bacon and Barbells. I'm getting pretty good at this whole ad read thing. Today, I am joined by someone who, unbeknownst to him, has had a very profound impact on me as a coach in my career. We met in 2010. He was a strength and conditioning coach at Penn State. He is now the director of strength and conditioning at Colorado College, Mr. Cam Davidson. Cam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, brother. You know what that whole intro reminded me of?
What's that?
First we feast. That guy that he never stumbles. That was perfect.
Perfect. I'm getting good. You do enough of these, and actually, I read a stat the other day that only 5% of podcasts that get started make it to 100 episodes. And I think we're at like 112 or something like that.
That's awesome, man.
It's been really, really cool. And, I'll call people and be like, hey, do you have an hour to chat with me? And they're like, I'm super busy. I'm like, okay, well, what if I put it on the internet? They're like, oh yeah, I got tons of time for you. Whenever you want to podcast.
That works.
Well, I got a podcast with, I'm trying to book Derek Woodsky. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this guy would never talk to me on his free time ever. But as soon as I put it in a podcast, it's like, yeah, sure, no problem.
Perfect.
But I know I can call you whenever I want.
Anytime. Yeah, man. Yeah.
So maybe give a little bit of a background to any of the listeners who may not be familiar with you. I know you've had quite a career in strength and conditioning, been in a number of schools. So fill us in.
Okay, got my start at University of Wyoming. And I wrestled there my first couple of years, got hurt. And that's what really got me into strength and conditioning was, how do I stay with it? I love it. When you're part of a team, in your whole life, you're like, who are you? A wrestler. What do you do? I wrestle. Right. So
yeah,
I had no identity outside of that, really, to be quite honest with you. And, I did a lot of other things, but that's what I wanted to do. And my strength coaches there were phenomenal. So when I had a chance to work with those coaches and stay with that team, that was a no-brainer for me. And when I was graduated, it was, I think, 10 days after graduation, and I'm sitting there and I was like, hey, I'm just going to go get a workout in because this weekend I'm going to move home. And my plan was, maybe I'll just work for my dad because I had worked construction for him for, a number of years. And I didn't really have a plan. What do you do with ex-phys? And I knew I loved strength and conditioning, but I never had anybody telling me, this is really how to get into it. And so I really just fell into it because I was just around the weight room all the time and I just loved it. And so, Gabe Teeple, he came up to me and he said, I know the guy at Marshall. He's got a grad assistantship open. Do you want it? I said, sure. He goes, give me your resume by tonight. And so I sent him my resume. I got a call the next morning from John Sanderson, who, we were at Marshall together for a couple of years. He took me to Clemson with him. Mm-hmm. I don't want to get too far ahead, but basically what happened was 2 days later, I'm hired at Marshall, packed my truck and drove to Marshall. I didn't even know it was in West Virginia. That's how quick this thing happened. Yeah. And for someone that had really never been east of Nebraska or in humidity ever, I grew up in Colorado. It was one of those things that was a huge culture shock. I just said, okay, let's go. So I went to Marshall, working with some phenomenal strength coaches there. I'm going to name drop, but Daniel Roos was a part of that. He's at VCU basketball for a long time.
Yeah.
Vaughn Robinson, who I believe is still with Arizona Diamondbacks. We had a really good core of GAs there, and credit to John Sanderson because it was him and then all of us GAs. And so it was all of us were young. We were feeling ourselves out. How do we coach? How do we program? How do we lead a team? And we all kind of came through that together. And it was awesome because there was a ton of competition. I want to be better than you and you and you. And it was cool because each of us had our own thing, right? Like I was the intense coach who got after kids. And, Daniel Roos, he can coach anybody, anytime, anywhere. He's a phenomenal coach. And, other guy was like better at programming and periodization. So we really all learned from each other really well and bounced ideas off each other. And that was just a really cool year. I think I was in grad school there for 10 months. John took me down to Clemson with him to work basketball. So
Hmm.
that was my part-time job. The 10 month with the grad school was just, I didn't want to be in Huntington any longer than I needed to at that
I don't
time.
think I blame you. Huntington,
Uh,
West Virginia is not really a very like a vacation spot.
nope. For me, I love the food. I love the people. I love Marshall, but there was a spot called the Cajun Kitchen. Best husk puppies I'd ever had. But then the Ohio River flooded and that fell into the river. And
Oh,
you know, so that's why I don't really go back. But anyway, so John, John was like, "Hey, I'm going to go to Clemson as the head basketball guy. Do you want to come down and help?" I said, "Absolutely." So I went down to Clemson as a part-time guy. I worked men's basketball with him. I was the guy working mostly the women's basketball team. I traveled with the girls that year, getting really immersed with travel and what that felt like. Really awesome to have the first experience traveling with a team, being the ACC where you're chartering everywhere. That
oh
was,
yeah,
you're going to Boston eating tuna steak, right? I've never even growing up in Colorado. I had trout, fish sticks, and
beef.
shrimp. Yeah, a lot of beef. So Clemson was great. I was there for I think 10 or 11 months, and then I got the head job at College of Charleston. Mostly driven by basketball there, but was able to be the director. And uh, I was able to be. We had 19 sports there, and that was a trip because our weight room was temporary. I had
What?
one, yeah, temporary weight room. It was built in like across George Street, which is right off of King Street, right downtown. It was just this good old boys club, and we were stuck in their side of the building. And they built when I on my interview, it was a nice size. When I got to the job, like 2 weeks later, they had built a racquetball court in it. So our weight room was like this long L. We had 4 squat racks, a leg press, and a set of dumbbells, and that was it for 19 sports.
Holy shit.
And that was the best experience I could have had because I'm going from Wyoming that had a 25, I want to say about a 20,000 square foot weight room
Yeah.
with everything you'd want. Marshall was okay. Clemson was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
I go to Charleston, I have nothing. And so I'm young, I'm 24, I'm intense, I'm kicking down the door to get things done. I was a I'm a way better director now than back then, but you kind of know that you're really never ready for things until you have to be, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So it was a really cool 2 years. Had great assistants. We were working 6 a.m. to midnight, like
Oh
three to
yeah.
4 days a week. It was a very good learning experience of, hey, maybe you don't want to burn out your staff or yourself anymore.
Hmm.
But at the time, I didn't have a family. I just started dating my now wife, so I was like, I'm just in it, and that's how we're going to do it. Good experience though. And so met my wife there. She was assistant volleyball coach at College of Charleston. She had played volleyball at Penn State, and Coach Rose called her and said, "Hey, I got a job open for you." And so I left the director position at Charleston to go be a volunteer at Penn State for a couple of years. And so my first few years at Penn State, it was voluntary because they didn't have a full time position open. Um, and so
Wild.
I took a leap of faith because I did not want Kalina to go up there and find some other dude,
Yeah.
and because we weren't married yet. So I was like, I'm in it. Everybody in this business said I was an idiot for going.
You
Like
were.
what are you? Yeah, like what are you doing? You're 24. You got a head job. Lucky, I
Yeah.
lucked out. And uh, I just took a leap of faith and I said, I don't care. This is what I'm doing. I'm going for the family. I'll be all right. And so little did I know that I was going from being mostly an Olympic weightlifter philosophy, right? Like back then
Yep.
in '05 to '07 was Olympic lift, then you squat, and then you do your auxiliary. And that's kind of how things were written. And that's when I started learning. I think Joe Ken was the first one to write that book that was really eye opening for me in the tier system and how
Yep.
you kind of go about a different way, which kind of brought me into powerlifting and West Side, right? So I started researching all of that stuff and how do I write in that way because the weight room at Charleston, we were not allowed to do Olympic lifts because the good old boys had their little room outside and they didn't want to hear us dropping weights,
Right.
right? So and we had mostly metal plates, so we didn't do a lot of Olympic lifts there. So getting into the Joe Ken style of tier system and getting into West Side and you know obviously we weren't true West Side because we weren't West Side, but getting into the conjugate thing was really cool for a nice learning experience of how to get strong and fast and still be athletic, right? So it definitely worked. But little did I know I was going to Penn State that was all hit,
Yeah.
right? And
Which like huge culture shock.
huge. And that was really tough for me, and I think it was tough for the coaches I worked with having to listen to me talk about conjugate and Olympic lifting and how that works. And it was a very, very good learning experience working with those coaches of hearing their philosophy and why they did what they did. And just it was a shock going from all barbells down to, hey, this is dominated by machines and dominated by 1 to 2 sets to failure, and this is what we're going to do out of season and in season. And learned a lot about what it was to do that. And holy crap, credit to those athletes, because those athletes are tough
Oh yeah.
to go through that, mentally just tough. And so did that for, I was there for 13 years, and when Fitz came in with Bill O'Brien, that kind of changed the whole shift of what that philosophy was there.
Just to clarify, you weren't a
Yep.
volunteer for 13 years.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Just
No.
wanted to point that out for the
Yeah. No.
audience.
So when Fitz came in, he hired me on full time, and then I was able to be lucky enough to move up the ranks a little bit. So I went from a part time to an assistant to a coordinator to then assistant director. So my last, I think, 4 years or so, I was the assistant director of Olympic sports there. One of the assistant directors. We had 4 or 5 there. So, just a really cool time of how do you move up? How do you deal with a culture shock philosophy that you don't necessarily agree with, but how do you learn to work within that and
Yeah.
and be a good team player? And they needed me to take field hockey through a workout. I'm doing it, right? Like,
Right.
you got to be a good team player and be able to work with those coaches. So it was a good learning experience. And so after about 13 years there, this opportunity at Colorado College opened up, and it was an opportunity to become a director again and lead a staff.
Mm-hmm.
Something that I was over one coach at Penn State, so it was one of those things where I want to go and lead a staff again. It was, Cam, we want you to come in and build a sports science department from the ground up because we don't have any sports science yet. And it was just one of those things where it's been such a good experience here. This is my 4th year. I came in with the new hockey coaches, so it was big time driven from hockey. I get to work women's soccer, our other Division I sport, and then I've got 2 phenomenal assistants that work the D3 side, and so it's been a really good situation here. We've had a great time building this thing and moving it forward.
It's interesting to hear you recount, because like I knew all this, but it's interesting to hear you recount like the opportunities that came up, you jumped on them, then you kind of take a career step back to move your family life forward.
Mhm.
It mimics, my journey going from South Florida to Robert Morris, and then from Robert Morris to the University of Tampa, and then from the University of Tampa to Queens. And I remember my first day at Queens as the director of strength and conditioning, walking into a weight room where I was mandated to work with football. Like, we had 15 sports, but it was my job to work with all of them in the rec center. So I'm like, oh, I have to coach these guys in a rec center. And at that point, I'm like all full of piss and vinegar, right? Like pushing buttons. The admin hated me, but we got the job done. Or even at Robert Morris, where the weight rooms, the same size as my basement now. So it's you learn a ton of lessons, though. It's a trial by fire, and the best coaches are the ones who embrace it, relinquish control to some degree, and then look for opportunities to get accomplished what they need to.
Sure.
And I'm sure along the way, let's say that this is the pinnacle of your job and this is the one that you're going to keep for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that you did leading up to this is the reason why you are where you are, right?
100%.
What are some of the kind of paradigm shifts that you had along that journey, and maybe speak to the influences that led to those paradigm shifts?
In like a coaching philosophy training standpoint, or?
Yeah, like the one that jumps to mind that, I remember the most was getting to work with the women's volleyball team that was perennial national champions and being challenged on every decision that you made.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a huge shift. And I love the way you put that, because it was one of those things where I came in. Now, they were under the HIT philosophy, and they won back-to-back national championships.
Yeah.
And I'm there on year 3, right? So I'm coming in with a new philosophy going, we're gonna do hang and power cleans, and yes, we're gonna snatch, and yes, we're gonna squat, and that's gonna be the basis of what we do. And and I had a lot of people disagree with me. I had the backing of Coach Rose, which was great, because I was hired under the strength and conditioning, but I had Coach Rose going to bat for me, and that really helped. I'm not sure that helped my attitude all the time. I was always trying to do it the right way, but sometimes you get salty with some things, and so it wasn't always the easiest road. But what was really cool about that was, if they can be athletic and win under a philosophy that I don't necessarily agree with, but they're not, they're available. They're available to play. I
Right.
think that's
Yeah.
the greatest asset that you can be as a strength coach is your kids are available, right? And there were some other things that we were testing when I took them over was overuse and acute injuries. And yes, they did go down, but our personnel changed as well. So I'm not going to say that Olympic lifting and what I was doing was the reason for the shift in acute and overuse injuries going way down. Maybe it was just because I had a group of 10 freshmen. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Fair.
Like I am not going to talk crap about any of those other coaches because stuff happens. I haven't had a lot of injuries in my career with my athletes, knock on wood, but you have them and they happen. We can't prevent everything. So it was a good shift in that because my number one thing was I don't get them hurt, keep them healthy, because these girls are touching 10-8 on a slide approach, and this my outsides are touching 10-4, 10-5. Back in 2009, that was really good. Now I think they're touching up 10-10. The game's gotten higher, and
The
so
evolution of sports crazy, man.
yeah, and it's one of those things where the paradigm shift was, we're going to be hitting a heavy triples in season on a back squat. So some of those DSs are hitting 255 for a set of 3 on a back squat, and at the same time we've got some other teams on the squat rack next to us doing sets of 15 with 165 on them and failing, and it's like, how do I deal with that? And what's the message we're sending as training like this, right? So I caused a little bit of waves because we were moving a lot of weight, and some of those coaches wanted to see that. So it was just that was a big shift in that philosophy. Was, hey, we're going to be strong and we're going to be jumping higher, and we're not always going to be complaining about being so sore and fatigued. And again, not trying to talk crap about the HIIT philosophy because there's a lot of good things about the HIIT philosophy for sure.
Well, and they also won championships. So it's like,
Yeah, we won.
if
We won 2 more, right?
if the metric of success of a program is measured in terms of championships, who gives the flying fuck how you got there?
100%. And that was the thing. So I was like, okay, they won with the HIIT routine, and then
Mhm.
we won back to back with my routine. And so we won 4 in a row, which was part of the 109 consecutive wins, right? Which is
Mhm.
still an NCAA record. And then the next 2 years, we make the Elite 8 and the Final Four, and we feel like complete failures,
Mhm.
right? And that's the tough part about winning is you lose all perspective. And ever since then, I don't care who I'm working with. I want to win. I hate losing. I want to win championships. I don't care what team it is or at what level I'm at.
We're going to talk about that a little later.
Okay, so that like I'm sometimes you got to be realistic.
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of personnel do you have, and what's going on in terms of where the program is? I'm not saying to be unrealistic all the time, but as a strength coach, I always have unrealistic goals, and I'm trying to push my athletes to that.
Mhm.
Mentally, this is what we're trying to do, and we're not. If we don't attain that goal, then we got to keep working, and you can't stop working after you win.
Right.
You don't win because you have one. You win because you continually do the things that got you there, and you innovate enough not to get your ass kicked by somebody who is innovating. So you
Mhm.
got to keep moving forward. And so I think early on the shift of the HIIT to the Olympic stuff worked really well just because it was mainly different. I
Mhm.
think those athletes liked it because it was different and they were into it and they were motivated. And that was kind of easy for me, except for a couple athletes there that were tough to work with, but in a really fun way, which was challenging for me. And those girls were so, uh, they were elite level mentally, physically, skill wise, and they challenged me.
Mhm.
They made me be better. If I wasn't on my game every single day, they were going to let me know about it, and I loved it. It was allowing them to be who they are, so I can be who I need to be for them.
Well,
Right. So it was really fun.
I got the opportunity to see that firsthand because Robert Morris is only 3 hours away, so I'd come
Mhm.
watch you coach and join in periodically, and it was, for me, it was so different because you were coaching a winning program and doing a lot of things similar, but also a lot of things differently than Hammer or Frank or Mark,
Mhm.
the other mentors that I've had, and being open to those new perspectives was phenomenal for me as a young coach. And I'm wondering, the next paradigm shift I'd love to discuss, you alluded to it a number of times, but like, what are some paradigm shifts that you went through between the ears over the course of the years?
The one thing that really helped me from a lot of people was it was hard for me to always build those relationships with those teams that were always winning
Okay.
because it was more about we're here in the weight room to do a job and you're here to work hard to the best of your ability, and then we got to go to the court and win in practice. Those girls worked so hard in practice.
Mm-hmm.
uh, those practices were intense, and sometimes they weren't able to leave practice until they won the drill. Like it was highly competitive. And so I got into that, and so between the ears it was one of those things like Todd, you mentioned Todd Hammer, and he was one of the ones that said, hey, we're all about relationships. Doesn't matter what you do under the bar, it's all about relationships. And at the time I completely disagree. I think this
So
is
did I.
I have to be honest with you and say, no, we're here to do a job and we're here to get stronger and faster, because if I send a girl up to Coach Rose who doesn't jumping higher, I'm not doing my job. And case in point, after we lost the Final Four, my whole point was like, okay, we're going to work so hard in the gym that we're not going to get beat by anybody the next year,
Mm-hmm.
which was good because we ended up winning another 2 back-to-back national championships, right? So that kind of worked. So I was able to win 4 and 6. They were able to win 4 and 6 years. I was just a part of it. But I went to Coach Rose and I said, hey, this middle, I won't say her name, but she squatted 315. And I was really proud of that because we got stronger. And he goes, oh, does that mean she's the strongest girl on campus, or are you actually going to get her to jump higher? Okay, we're done. And he shoos me out. And that really pissed me off because I'm like, man, I'm trying to do what we're doing. And that was the biggest paradigm shift that could have ever happened to me, was him saying that to me.
Yep.
So strength coaches out there that are listening to this, that your coach is going to say some stuff to you,
Oh yeah.
and it's going to make you mad. But at the time, and thank God I had my wife, Kalina was coaching on the staff at that time, and I went to her office and I was pissed, and she goes, my wife is so cool because she's like just cool as a
Yep.
cucumber, the most
Yep.
even, mentally toughest, mentally most stable person I think I've ever met. And she's helped me a lot. And she goes, is he wrong? And I was like, what? No, he's not. No, he's not wrong. No, he's not wrong. And so that was the biggest paradigm shift for the rest of my career was, we're here to help these athletes in their sport, not just to squat heavy, because the maximal strength was always the most important thing for me. And now in 2025, it's not. It is not. It's important. It's important. And my athletes are strong and we do work on it. It's just I take a lot more time going into the power speed phases and being comfortable going away from that maximal strength. And I still kind of follow the 30-day residual, right?
Yep.
If I'm away from it for more than 30 days, I'm not comfortable. And some of those power days, I'm still letting them. So we'll do our power work and I'll still let them go up and hit a couple singles at 80 just to be able to feel that. Because, and as a powerlifter, like 80 to 90% is different than below, and then 90% plus is a lot different. So
Right.
if you want your athletes to be strong, they better be practicing being strong. But now it's one of those things where I'm so much better at allowing the time for speed work. And hey, let's take away from, let's lessen this bucket. So back then it was like 3 buckets,
Yep.
strength, power, speed. Now it's like I feel like I'm in a producer's booth where I've got like 12 different
Mm-hmm.
gauges, and I slide up, you slide down, and when do you want to slide up and slide down? And I'm just more comfortable going away from some things because I'm not essentially chasing numbers. I'm just chasing the quality of that skill. I'm just chasing force. I'm not chasing a back squat number. I'm just chasing an opportunity to produce force with high velocities and low velocities. And that's the thing I really have to teach my athletes now is, hey, like we're gonna go away from the back squat for a while. And with hockey, I go away from it for a long while in season.
Yeah.
And so when I come back to it, I'm just like, don't worry about what the number is. Just worry about you getting to a point where you feel like you're working hard with that force and your intent is there, and we'll be fine. So that was a huge shift for me was Coach Rose at the time. I thought he was a jerk, but it was the best thing any coach could have ever said to me. So that was a huge thing in my mind of shifting my whole perspective.
Yeah. There's one thing that I was taught very early on, kind of by accident, was that your sport coaches are also somewhat coaching you during the process. Because at that point, like, you're still young in the game. I mean, you're in your 30s, were you not? at that point?
At that point,
Yeah, early 30s.
yep, I was early 30s.
So I remember I was when I was at Queens, I was 26, the head strength coach at 26, which mind-boggling. And I went into the football coach's office, and he was like, "All right, so are we going to be doing some cleans?" And I was like, "Nope, probably not." That's actually how he talks too. He's like, can you explain to me why? And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely, because your guys have terrible shoulder mobility and they can't catch in that overhead position or in that front rack position. They can't even front squat." He's like,
Mhm.
"Okay, so how do we get them there?" And it's like, well, we could try to focus on getting them there and improve their mobility and, do these all other things. Or I could just have them jump and throw and then let the training take care of the rest of it. And so it was kind of this educational process. And he was like, well, what's the goal here? Because I just want to win. And that was a big click for me because it was the first time I was ever in a position where winning, I was the head strength coach of a team where winning was the priority. And I mean, because Hammer took men's basketball, Hammer took men's lacrosse. So I was just an assistant there. I wasn't involved in those conversations. And that was the quick click for me, the same way it was with Coach Rose for you. Is like, oh, like he doesn't give a shit what I do as long as he wins.
100%.
And for me as well, that reframed it as the strength and conditioning program is a means to an end. So for an athlete, strength and conditioning is just GPP.
Mhm.
And we can do all these fancy things and try to mimic, energy systems development and all that other stuff. But unless there is transfer of training from the weight room to the SPP of sports, you're failing. So it got me a lot more detached from modalities. It got me a lot more detached from certain exercises or certain ways of doing things, and came to realize like, oh, like my toolbox is incredibly infinite. And I've been tying myself to these very rigid guidelines.
Mhm.
I'd love for you to actually touch on training the Olympic throwers. Because though that group of guys was fucking cool.
Wow. So that was such a cool experience because at Penn State, again, I'm trying to not be negative on anybody there, but they kind of shoved me to track and field, because we were at the corner of campus, and the strength coach at the time over there was just a desk attendant, so we had to take attendance with the clicker and make sure all these people are coming in and all this stuff. And the previous strength coach didn't write a lot of programs. But when I got there, I was like, I'm not here to be a desk attendant. I'm,
Right.
I'm here to I'm here to coach. And so I just went to they all came. It was kind of a revolving door. And if anybody has worked at high level track and field, that's kind of how they do it, right? They do their practice and then they just kind of come up after they run or throw, right?
Yeah.
And whenever that practice ends, hey, they'll be up there. Now we tried to streamline that in the later years of track and field there, which was awesome. And we were able to say, hey, throwers are at 4 to 5, and that's it. But at any rate, at the time, it was I might see 10 sprinters and the pole vault group and the first 5 throwers. And then as the day went on, it just kind of was a revolving door. And now you see some cross country, and now you see some multis, and now you see some more throwers. But they're not the shot putters. They're the jav group. So for me, it was okay. How do I really start helping these kids? And number one was just to know their name, and number two, just start jumping in and coaching. And so the first guy to come to me was the multis coach. And he goes, yeah, I'll let you write for my group. And I went, okay, well, I've never written for multis. What would you like? He goes, okay, so what's the one thing you can't live without with a sprinter? What's the one thing you can't live without as a thrower? And what's the one thing you can't live without for a jumper? And that's what your program should be. And I was like, cool. And he was great. And he was the other guy, he's more of the physiological mind. Like he was a professor at Penn State as well. And he goes, Cam, I'm looking at your programming, and I'm looking at your programming, and you're pulling the mitochondria too far in the same day. And I went, wow, I've never looked at it in that perspective before. He goes, I'm down doing power work, and you're going to bring them up to the weight room to do all these reps. You're
Yeah.
pulling the mitochondria away from what I want the skill to be that day, which was why I love triphasic training and the way Cal Beats put it.
Right.
in how you undulate and really hit that skill for that day, which is why I like the quadrant system and why I like the ideas of microdosing. And let's not go that route because that's another rabbit hole. But so for the throwers, I'm sorry that's kind of a long intro to say
No, that's great.
that weight room was full of machines and we had one platform for an entire track and field team that wanted to do Olympic lifts. And so we were doing snatches between the machines. Not safe, but again, I had a job to do and we had to get it done. So sometimes we had 3 barbells rotating on the same platform.
Right.
It wasn't the best setup, but we got it done. But those guys would come in. And at the time, so I'm sitting there, Ryan Whiting walks through the door. And if people don't know Ryan Whiting, he was a 6-time NCAA champ at Arizona State. And he's from Harrisburg, and he's back to Penn State because it's a USA training center for
Right.
track and field. Just like wrestling with the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club and what they're doing up there at Penn State. It's a regional club for these Olympic guys to come back and train. So that's what track and field had. And so the throwers coach at the time, TJ Crater, comes up and he goes, "Hey, Ryan's here. Do you think you'd want to help Ryan?" And I went, "Who's Ryan?" And I was like, "Of course." So he walked through the door and he's, I think he's like 6'2", 6'3", and he's like, he was like 320, 330 at the time.
At the time, he was the biggest person I'd ever seen.
Huge. And I'm starting going, "Yeah, I can help you. What do you want to do?" And he goes, "Well, I don't know. You tell me. You're the strength coach." And I was like, "All right, let's do it." And so he came in snatching 140 kilos. Right. And I think I worked with him for about 4.5, 5 years, and he left snatching 163, which was cool for that level of athlete to be able to increase his snatch that much in that amount of time. I thought it was good. He was strong, but it was one of those things where, we're going to be Olympic based. And that's when I started taking over throwers. And we had Joe Kovacs on the team.
Oh yeah. Big
right?
boy.
And Joe Kovacs has won silver in the last 3 Olympics. Like, he's pretty good.
He's not bad.
And he's pretty strong. And I don't know how much Olympic lifting he still does. I think a little bit, but I think he's mostly more on that powerlifting side now, which in retrospect, I kind of wish I would have done a little bit more on that. But at the time, that's what my philosophy was, and that's what we were going to do. And we went into it 100%. But Joe was the kind of guy that I'd say, as an Olympic weightlifter myself at the time, and I was still competing, move the bar around a couple times. Do a couple of these, get your shoulders ready. Hit 60 kilos, then we'll jump to 90, then we'll jump to 110 or something, right? And Joe's like, let me just put on some weight and get going. I was like, it's one of those times where you go, what's the perfect things for these guys, and what's going to help them, like actually like not putting a leash on this freaking wild horse. Yeah. Like don't put a saddle on this dude, like, because he's linked up and he knows what he's doing. So his first set was 140 kilos on cleans.
Like walk in cold, 140 kilos.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm like, "Joe, like, you might want to hit 100 kilos first. Please just hit 90 kilos first."
Yeah.
And he's like, "I'll be all right." And anybody listening to this thinking that, hey, like, Joe's going to walk into 140 kilos, that's the most unsafe, stupid thing you could do. Well, if you saw the speed and ease at which he did it, because he's already warmed up from throwing, and I'm not trying to say it was the best idea, but his numbers were 140. He went 140, 160, 180, 200, 220. That was the way he cleaned. And oh my gosh, those guys were squatting 650 plus. They were benching 500 plus. And it was just one of those things where, hey, I'm going to spot you on the bench, but please get the rep because I'm going to have to like Zercher lift this thing off of you if you can't get it. And it was just one of those times where you have so many big bodies and so many genetically linked up freaks on your hands that it was one of the coolest things that I've ever been able to be a part of. They were so fun.
One of the things that you taught me while I was watching you coach these guys was like, there is a such thing as too strong, especially when it comes to transfer of training. Speak a little bit on that.
Well, what I kind of meant on that, and I think it's a pretty simple concept, but there were times where we were squatting, 600 and like, hey, let me put 650 on. Like, okay, like it's getting to a point where when you're throwing, like, is a 700 squat going to help you throw farther? Maybe. But I was kind of at the time where going, why are we still chasing this number when we could really just back up and we can really train you really well from 65 to 80%? and get this rate of force development and get this. And that's why I love the Olympic lifts for throwers, because they start in the ring and it's a nice controlled acceleration through the throw, being strong enough to hold position to the forces you're going to get through the ring. And
Okay.
I feel like it's the exact same thing in Olympic lifting. That's why we were so into Olympic lifts, because it's you have this strength through positions of the lift, through a controlled acceleration to the finish. I think it's
Yeah.
the exact same, except you're not letting go of the barbell. So that's what I liked, and that's what I wanted to do. Was I wanted to get away from the squat and away from the bench and do the things that kind of mentally was a little bit the same mindset of being that controlled hold positions, technical. Let's be technical lifters, and
Right.
let's be better at that, because we were still getting strong at the snatch and clean and jerk. We were seeing numbers go up, and we were seeing their triple broad jump go up, and we were seeing the behind the body. I don't remember what it's called.
I don't remember what
It's
it's
like a
called
Max
either.
Jones or something. I've been out of throwers for a little bit. I think it was a Max Jones testing, but we were seeing those numbers go up because I thought the Olympics were going up. So I thought we were strong enough on the bench. I thought we were strong enough on the squat, and I felt that the power numbers were going to help us throw farther.
Well, it always made
That's
sense
why.
to me because you're like, Paul, the weight of the shot or the discus or the jab, the weight of those implements doesn't change. So why do we need to get so maximally strong? And then you call into question like the recovery capacity associated with those maximal lifts. Like a 600-pound squat to move, I think it's a 16-pound shot,
Mm-hmm.
right? So 600-pound squat, 16-pound shot, there's a pretty big discrepancy there. But if I'm perpetually trying to push that 600 to 650, that's 650 to 700, how much recovery capacity am I taking away from that athlete that could be dedicated to more power qualities or more injury resilience qualities
Yeah.
or just other training qualities that maybe they're missing? And it just made sense. Like, well, we need to get them strong enough that they're really fucking strong and throwing that shot feels like air.
Yeah.
But that's not the difference between 650 and 700.
No, and
It's a sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
no, you're exactly right. And that was my thought. Like, these guys are benching 500. Do I have to get them to 550? And I think where I missed the boat back then, because these lifts are taking an hour and a half, 2 hours long, and
Yeah.
they already threw for 2 hours. So it's like, man, I don't want to keep these guys here, because it takes, when you squat 650, those are the sets that we are doing the proper warm ups. Like, there's no way I'm going to let you jump in and do 405 for your first set.
Yeah.
Kovacs would still want to do that, but I'm like, no, like, you're going to go 225, 315, 405, 500. That's your warm up.
Yeah.
And so, but that takes time. And big guys like that, they do a warm-up set, they sit down for 3 minutes. It's almost exactly like Olympic weightlifting, right? And so where I missed the boat though back then was, I don't think I did enough tissue quality, and I don't think I did enough single leg work.
Okay.
Like barbell Bulgarian. I think that is a lift that is so well suited for a thrower. And so going so far on the end of being better at Olympic lifting, it takes a lot of practice, and it takes some variations to get them to get better at that situation that they're sucking at. So if they're not moving their feet right, if they're not holding positions right through the second pull, working on the third pull, right? Like, you're really strong first and second, but you're so slow on your third pull that you're not making these lifts. And that's why you're getting frustrated. So I'm going to take a cycle, 3 to 4 weeks to work on third pull. And so it was all these qualities that I think took away from, maybe would have gotten them more athletic on a tissue quality, healthy standpoint. Now, they weren't hurt at all.
Right.
We were never injured. We were never hurting for that side of it. But looking on it now, it could have gotten a lot better. And that's the downside of Olympic lifting. When you go that far into it, is it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Do you know how many Olympic lifts I do with hockey in the past 6 years?
I'm going to guess it's 0.
It's zero. It's zero, because we're strong, we're fast, we jump, we throw, and it opens up a lot of time to work on the hips.
Yeah.
And Olympic lifting, frankly, doesn't do a good job at that. And so, because we're not catching deep in the hole, who gives a crap what you snatch if you can't skate? Right. So it's just, that's another paradigm shift is I used to be the Olympic weightlifting guy. And that's why people used to call me like, hey, I want to snatch my team. How do I do this? And I still love doing that. And a lot of the clients I train on the side, you know, a lot of them, 8 of them are Olympic weightlifters.
Right.
So I still like to do it, but with my teams, so now I go full circle going, maybe those hit guys were onto something.
Maybe.
I don't know. I think we probably should have done more power speed work, but it's been full circle. I've gone in and out of all this stuff because of the opportunities of who I trained and how I trained them and what we did. But the problem at the time where we were always, the teams that I was working with were successful, so I just never changed a whole lot.
Yeah,
Right?
I
I never
mean,
really had to change because we were winning.
it's funny how that works, right? Because obviously you learn a lot more from failure than you do success.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have too much success early on, especially as a young strength coach, I think you associate the team's success with your proficiency. So if you're like, all right, well, this team's winning, I'm obviously doing a good job at what I'm doing. Why would I change anything? And then it almost just reinforces those personal biases that you have. So the fact that you had so much exposure to different coaching styles along the way, I love that at every aspect I've asked you about like certain things, you've been like, oh, I had this completely wrong and I had this completely wrong. It's like, to me, the amount of ego that you have to set aside to be able to say that while still believing that you're a good coach.
I, it's always been hard. Like I was recently asked, what's one thing in your career you want to hang your hat on? That was a really hard question for me because I really don't think there is one. What do I want to hang my hat on? Is it the throwers that were going to the Olympics? Like 25% of the USA Olympic tryers for throwers were our guys. 25% of them.
That's so cool.
Two of the top 3 throwers at Rio and London were our guys. It's like, how does it? Do I want to hang my hat on that, or do I hang my hat on a women's volleyball championship teams?
Mm-hmm.
We won 4 in 6 years, and that program won 6 and 8. Do I want to hang my hat on them winning, or do I hang my hat on, Penn State hockey became a Division I team and we won the Big Ten championship in year 3? Am I going to hang my hat on that? I don't think there's a thing I'd hang my hat on because
Well,
you know what I'm saying?
How much control did you really have on that?
Our athletes were available. I think that's the biggest, like even the times where I'm starting to do sports science now and I do catapult, we do force plates, we do force frame. And, the times that I used first beat with just internal load, it's like, we're doing these things to find answers for questions that we don't really know the question yet. You don't know a question about sports science until you're about year or 2 in, and you're like, okay, I understand trimp, and I understand average player load. And so with Penn State hockey, I was like, I wonder how that relates to certain times of the game and what happens in the game. So then I started taking notes on when we score a goal, where is our player load and our trimp? And when we get scored on, where is it? And we found that, when your trimp is really low, we get scored on. And there's the media timeouts between each period, right? So if you're on
right.
TV, you have to have like 3. And I was like, okay, first segment of this period, we scored 3 goals, and our trimp player load intensity was green. Mm-hmm. It was in the positive. It was good. When we're in the red, we had this game against Wisconsin at Wisconsin. We were winning in the second period. They tied it up in the third. We ended up losing in overtime. And that was a kick to the gut because we needed to win that game. And I think the goals were like, we were 1 and 11, 4 and against when we were in the red, and we were like 8 and 0 when we were in the green. So Penn State hockey is incredibly productive and good when our trimp and player load intensity is in the right spot. And we learned, how do you deal with that? Shift length. Huh. That was the most innovative thing that I think I've done in my career. Was we figured out that using internal load only was a means to say, if your shift is above 40 seconds, you are screwing yourself in the team. So if you're not taking care of the puck on your shift, if you can't get pucks deep and you're committing high turnovers, and let's say you're on defense, you get an offensive rush, but then you get a turnover. If you have to play defense, then offense, then right back to defense, and now your shift length is up to 56 seconds and you're fatigued, we get scored on, is what that told us. So it changed our I went to coach and I said, hey, I think there's something here. And then I looked at the NHL numbers, and the NHL said 40 seconds. I guess it would have been a lot easier just to look at that number first. but but I wouldn't have had the conviction behind it when I went to coach. I was like, hey,
Right.
when our shift, because then I got numbers from the director of ops. I got all shift length numbers when I was doing my sports science, because 5-on-5 shift length was important. And I was like, every time a guy is in the red in shift length, they're in the red in the trimp, and our team's numbers are getting screwed. So our language as a coaching staff wasn't be smart in your shifts. Our language shift to take short, intense, hard shifts. Don't be selfish and get your ass off the ice if you can. If you can do a good change, change for the team. Don't stay out there for yourself. And that was a huge paradigm shift in those teams. And knowing that, we went up to Joe Louis Arena in our third year of being a Division I hockey team. We beat Michigan in regulation. We beat Minnesota in double overtime, and then in the finals we beat Wisconsin in double overtime, back to back to back nights, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Not one shift was in the red. Not one shift. And so what that meant to me was we're in shape, we're going hard, we're changing for the team, so we're not overly worked. And everybody's like, oh my God, we just played a Thursday game in regulation, we played a Friday game in double overtime. How are we going to be ready for Saturday? And my answer was, we're trained for this. Like, you know it, we
Right.
know exactly what we're doing. You guys stick to the game plan of your shift lengths and being smart, and the rest will take care of itself. And it did. And we won the Big Ten championship and got to the NCAAs. And that was a huge conviction for my entire career, was using little pieces like that. I didn't think I was going to go down that road, but here we are.
No, I
But
think
that's
it's
what
fucking phenomenal. It's
but that's
great.
what I'm searching for now. Is like, okay, I know the deadlifts and the benches and the pull-ups. That's going to take care of itself. What are the force plate numbers telling me, and how can I manage my lifts to, yes, I have to increase this skill, this number, because this number tells me I am more successful on the ice as a team, not as an
Mm.
individual, as a team. Right. And so that's where my mindset is now. It's with throwers back at Penn State, it was clean and jerk, snatch, bench, squat. And then they're just going to go throw far. And then with volleyball, it was squat and vertical jump. And then with hockey, it's internal and external load, and how do I push the right qualities at the right time in season in the weight room. So it's a completely different perspective. The coaching stays the same. You
Right.
coach your team, you coach the individual, right? None of that's changed. But that's how that has shifted over the years.
How much of that data that you're collecting plays into the actual programming of the team? Because when you're telling me, all right, well, shift length 40 seconds, get in, get out. I'd be lying if I didn't say my first thought is, well, how can I make that 45?
Case in point, a lot of our players score more goals right now when they're 45 to 50.
Okay.
And so I train my team to be able to put up with a minute shift. So when I'm doing my off-season conditioning, or I keep that conditioning in season, we want to train them for the worst case scenario, right? Like my Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is all anaerobic. It's power, it's speed, it's strength. But my Thursday, Friday, all aerobic, all, hey, you might puke. I'm sorry about that. If you ate too much, you might puke. But Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is training our guys for the best case scenario on the ice. And the other days are training them for the worst case scenario. So if I only say, hey, our shift length is going to be 40 seconds, that's really stupid on my part.
Yeah.
Because now if they get penned in, if we're on a penalty kill and we can't change, and now they double us up, they triple us up. If I don't train those guys to be able or tough enough to put up with that shift, because their next 2 or 3 shifts are going to be screwed because of it, because they can't recover. So I'm not saying don't train them. I'm just saying if you can change for the team, and the puck's deep and you can get a change and you've already been on defense for 35 seconds, I think it's great if you change for the team. That's what I'm saying.
How much impact do you think the weight room has on mindset and then technical, tactical aspect of sport? Because what jumps to me is like, you had to learn, obviously, wrestling, fighting, but you had to learn technical, tactical of volleyball. You had to learn technical, tactical of hockey. You had to learn technical, tactical of all the other sports that you're working with. How much does that play into the stuff that you do and the decisions you make?
It's huge. It's huge. But keep in mind that when I got into the business, when you and I were young training at Penn State in that weight room back then, How much sports science was being utilized?
Oh, nothing. None.
Nothing.
I think
It was,
tendos were just coming out.
yeah, it was all back then. I look at those programs now and go, they're okay. We got strong, we got fast, we were healthy, right?
Yeah.
But now you have to have more of that 360-degree approach because your competitors are doing sports science and your competitors are undulating and your competitors are microdosing and they're figuring out ways of consolidating that stress for the days to make sure that you're worked and recovered. But back then it was, if I'm strong and fast, our coaches are good enough to know when they need to be ready. We didn't have to be a part of it back then.
Yeah.
When teams started to do that, and we didn't at the time, I felt we got surpassed in the fatigue area. We were still strong, we were still fast, but the management of fatigue got worse.
Yeah.
And that was a huge thing for me. And so the mindset of technical tactical is why I train my guys as many days in the weight room as I can, because there has to be a day that this is my technical day in the weight room to get tactically better on the ice.
Yep.
So one of my lifts includes, the 3D straps.
Yep.
I just put that 3D strap around the waist to a maxed out cable column, and I elevate their foot, and we lean away from it and do a outside edge squat. It's an outside edge squat, and I pair that with a transverse lunge. Why? Because if you're an offensive guy on the ice and you have to be F3 and you turn the puck over deep on the ice, if that guy can't skate backwards and open up his hip to go contest before the red line,
Yep.
because if you don't contest before the red, he can throw that puck deep, right? So I'm working the movement in here, and my language to the team is, hey, this isn't, I don't write med ball transverse lunge with a reach. I write F3 lunge.
Okay.
Just so they know
Interesting.
if they're F3 on the ice, this is the way my hip has to move, and this is the way I have to be strong and reach and go. So I call it F3. So that is sports specific to me. I know people hate that term, but that's the technical piece in the weight room to get tactically better. It's everywhere in my programming. It's the only day that's not there is my maximal strength day.
Sports specific is such a triggering term to a lot of people. But to me, there's always been an element of, that kind of makes sense. How do you find the balance between understanding that training is GPP, like we mentioned before? Like, it is just generally physically preparing our athletes to be bigger, stronger, faster, more available.
It is GPP. And the only reason why I go as far to say, my soccer girls do a med ball transverse lunge with their reach. It's just not called F3 lunge because that doesn't make sense. I just call it transverse lunge. Sometimes it's the language. Sports specific is the language. It doesn't have to be a different lift.
Right.
Well, the outside edge is different because yes, it's getting on the outside edge of their skate. So that one is sports specific. But if you think about it as a lateral lunge,
mm-hmm.
that's inside edge of your skate. So how do you get to the outside edge of your skate? Well, you have to do something to get you the outside edge. Soccer doesn't need that, but hockey does. So that little piece is what sports specific is. It's one exercise once a week, which is sports specific because of the mindset that we're talking about it.
Yeah.
And the rest of it is getting strong and getting fast and being powerful. But these guys want to know, how do I get better at battling in the corner?
Right.
So I just name the exercise different just to speak to them mentally. That's it. So you might look at my soccer program and my hockey program, and you might see 4 different exercises. They're all the same. I just call them different things because mentally it just touches a different spot in their brain.
And I'm sure. Okay, let's shift gears a little bit. So we talked a lot about the X's and O's of the training. What fascinates me the most about it's funny because when I was coming up, I was all about X's and O's. I was all about sports science, physiology.
Yeah.
I was reading all the books. But at the end of the day, I realized that all athletes are people. And until I realized that I needed to learn how to manage people better.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to me a little bit about your evolution on the people side of things, because I knew you as a motherfucker, and I know I know that that's not the case anymore. I'm sure you have some motherfucker in you, but that's not you anymore.
Well, I am a type of guy. I am motivated by getting my ass chewed.
Mhm.
I'm not motivated by good job. I think for me, good job is the two most detrimental words for my progress. And I can't remember where I heard that quote, but I believe in it. But I do have a twin brother. Okay. And in high school wrestling, we had an assistant coach that was incredibly intense and a jackass, frankly. I loved the guy. I spent every minute with him in the off season. I used to travel to his house up in the town up north from where I grew up, and we used to go run up the mountain. We used to lift in his basement, then go run up the mountain and sit in the sauna. You know, I loved him. He was the most intense dude ever. He just wanted us to be tough and go out there and kick the crap, no mercy.
Yeah.
And I loved it. Now we were in high school practice, and there was a day where I kind of had a bad day, and I was getting beat. My partner was on top, and I wasn't escaping. And coach comes up and he goes, "Stop being such a pussy and get your ass off the mat." And to me, I went, "You're right. Like, let's go." So I fixed it. I got up and I had a better practice. He said it to my brother, and my brother quit. My brother quit
Oof.
the very next day
Yeah.
because that guy's an asshole. I don't need that. Oh wow. And I didn't realize the importance of that day until I was at Penn State, coaching for that long at Penn State, going, wow, people are motivated differently.
Yeah.
And if you can have a biological match be motivated differently by that person, that says something. So that was the realizing that is what helped me, because that's why I said earlier, you coach your team, but then you coach the individual. So
Okay.
it might be a team where you have to kick your team in the butt. The energy's low. Hey, get your asses in gear. Let's fricking go. This is an important day, right? We got a big game coming up. We got to pick it up. But you know, there's 3 or 4 guys on that team that don't like that. So I'll go over and I'll go over on the side, like between their sets, and I'll put my arm around them. Hey man, how you doing today? Like, hey, your technique's great. Just give me a little bit more speed on the way up. Just coach your team, but manage the individuals. The
Yeah.
team message has to be the same. We want to be team first, intentional. We want to have gratitude and resiliency. That's our culture for our team. So that message doesn't change. As a strength coach, my message is the exact same as my head coach. It has to be.
Hmm.
So our whole thing is we want to be tough and resilient. But if I know a kid has having a tough day, he had a tough practice, he's coming in here like, hey man, like, you good? What do you got to do to have a great day in here? And sometimes me just telling him that, he goes, I'm good. I'll be all right. I'm good. I'm like, great.
Yeah.
Let's have some fun. That's my message to him, is let's have fun. My message to the team is let's work hard. I don't care that you're tired. We're going to be resilient and trained. But to some individuals, like, hey, let's enjoy this process and let's have fun. Um, and that's why I like being around. And back in my early years, I didn't travel a whole lot. I was only around that team in the weight room.
Yep.
That's why I say get out of the weight room, go to practices, travel with them if you can, go to meals with them. You know, go to a game, get up in the morning and go to team meal and just see how they are. Do the face test. Like, who feels like shit, who doesn't, who's into it, who's not. And the
Yeah.
ones who aren't, is maybe that's the person you'll do, like we used to do a mobility routine after we ate, right? So it's like, I go up and touch the people that I think I need to touch, like talk to and say, just kind of pick them up a little bit. So we're all people, within the machine of being a team. It's made up of a lot of individuals that might not be having a great day.
Yeah.
So that's how I do it now, is you got to keep an eye on that. It's important.
Yeah. Hammer was the first person to really hit that to me. I remember he's like, listen, they know that you know what you're talking about, but they don't care unless they know you care about them.
Yeah, for
And I
sure.
was like, yeah, you're right. And it fucking eats me alive that as I get older, I start acting more like Hammer. It fucking, I told him this. I'm like, man, I say shit you said to me so often, and it fucking kills me because I just stop and I'm like, fuck this guy.
Yeah. Well, he had Todd had such good soft skills for that, but
Yeah.
not in other areas.
Not not with his peers. Not with his peers.
I love Todd, but yeah, it's so important. It's so important. It doesn't mean that I never didn't care. I've
No,
always cared about my athletes, and
of
I
course.
still talk to athletes that I trained back in 2005, 2006. I still
Same.
talk to them. They're great people, and they knew that I cared. It was just, it wasn't as, hey, how you doing? It was like, hey, great job working hard today. I'll see you tomorrow. It was just different.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that I could have done to help myself with that is have kids.
I don't think that's a lesson that young people need to learn right now.
Nope. But I'm
But
just saying, I
when
know,
you're
but
ready, when you're ready.
when you're ready. But when I had, so I have two daughters, right?
Yeah.
When I had my first daughter, I had girls that were overseas playing pro volleyball because they'd come back to Penn State and train. And after the team lift, they'd come up to me and be like, "You're different. Like you're a lot softer than you used to be." And I was like, "I'm not soft, like
Yeah.
that." But they're right because I have a daughter, and now you start thinking of how do I want them to be treated, and how do I
Right.
think that needs to happen, and maybe I can get something out of these athletes without being the hard ass,
Yeah.
and that was I was good at being the hard ass for a long time. I could motivate you. I just did it through that means, but now it's just different, and I think I still have the skill to be a hard ass, but I think it's better. You don't have to be that way all the time.
I think
So
I think as long as you can exist along a spectrum and be somewhat of a chameleon with the individual,
yeah, good word. Yep,
you're probably in the right place.
100%.
Let's talk a little bit about winning and what loss haunts you the most, and why is it me beating you at darts?
What everybody doesn't know is I have never erased that score. That score is still on that board. I took the board down and bought a new board, and I've never erased it.
So that was the last time I was ever inebriated was when you were feeding me alcohol in your garage and end up beating you at darts. And I'm so happy to hear that it haunts you to this day.
It does. It does. I don't like losing. Um, the biggest loss that's haunting me forever. That's a really good question, man. I think personally it was I didn't win a state championship my senior year of wrestling because I was undefeated going to the state tournament and didn't win. That loss haunts me forever. So there's a lot of things personally of not being able to enjoy the moment back then and being so wrapped up into winning that it was detrimental to my performance. I'm the number one wrestler undefeated going to the state tournament, and I don't win because I build it up too much. That was detrimental. So that really helped me as a coach. Teams, we were in the final four, and our setter went down because she stepped on someone's foot and rolled her ankle. That one hit me really hard because that team could have won it.
Yeah.
And it was because of an injury that she stepped on the girl's foot across the under the net.
Yeah.
And I beat myself up over that. And I still do that. Athletes get hurt. You're like, what could I have done different in my programming, in my preparation to not let that happen? The outside for Louisville, she stepped on someone's foot over the net and they ended up losing the next night. And if she would have been in, would they have won? I don't know.
Yeah.
But you have your go-to person go down like that. That'll haunt you.
Yeah.
That loss eats me to this day. So whenever in my program I say, maybe I can cut that out for right now. I never cut stuff that I think is going to help us stay healthy. I never trim that out. So that hurts me. Our first NCAA tournament in hockey, we had to play Denver, and they just absolutely destroyed us because we thought we were pretty good that year. We got destroyed in the first round. That haunts me to this day. How do we be more prepared?
What about the most meaningful win?
The most meaningful win to me was my very first volleyball championship. And that was a hard one not to say hang your hat on. But that one was to see the hard work and to see what those girls go through every single day and the level that they work and the level of the expectations from Coach Rose to all of those girls was so high. There was just a lot of emotions in that one because that was a lot of the seniors, like they were going to go out to win their last matches. And that was my first one, but that's what it meant a lot to me because we were playing Texas in the finals, and volleyball, Texas is incredible athletes always. They can jump out of the gym. Never met their strength coach in person, but I love him. I think he does such a good job. And so The thing about that is we went down 0-2.
Whew.
So this team won back-to-back national championships. I'm now the new strength coach, Olympic lifting guy. It's supposed to be better at the time, right? And so now we're 0-2 in the finals. And by the way, I used to warm up the team. Like the team always warmed up for games. They did not warm up for that match because they didn't warm up when they won it the first time, so they just never warmed up for those matches. And that ate me alive because I'm like, oh my god, like my knee tucks could have helped us or
Your
something
knee
stupid.
tucks.
So stupid, right? But we're down 0-2, and it was so meaningful because Coach Rose goes into the timeout or into the break and goes, you seniors in this room have every ring the last 3 years of your career. I don't think that you're going to let Texas take your last one. And that was a piece of coaching
Ooh.
that was huge. He didn't say anything else. And then he came out, and then we had a freshman, Darcy Dorton. Darcy went off, and Darcy was yelling at seniors. And so it was meaningful in a way that you saw a freshman step in and become a leader and earn her stripes. And she still is an absolute badass that match. Darcy Dorton helped us win that. She's the reason we came back and won that. I'm just going to come out and say that.
That's so cool.
We're down in 2. We beat Texas in 5. We hear the speech from Coach. We see Darcy go off. I was sitting next to our AD, our assistant AD, and we won. I went to high five him. He punched me right in the gut, knocked the wind out of me in celebration. The after party we shall not speak of, but it was just one of the coolest things I've ever been a part of. That was the most meaningful win I've ever been a part of.
I love that. If there was a message that you could have on a billboard on the side of the highway for everyone to see, what would it say on it?
Enjoy what you do. Things get hard, things get easy. Things worthwhile are never easy. And some people, you go through the honeymoon phases of something new or a job you have, or a relationship you have, and things get hard. And that's when I think a lot of people quit because mentally they're done, physically they're done. Something's happening, and there's always going to be, I think maybe if I can piggyback, I might say just focus on what you can control or don't listen to the noise. Like enjoy what you do. Don't listen to the noise, because if you enjoy that moment every time and you find something that you really love about it, it makes the hard worth it. And it doesn't make it easy. It just makes the hard worth it. And I think when you look back at some of those things, it was worth it, man. All those days I worked 6 a.m. to midnight at Charleston, all the days that I worked throwers from 2 p.m. to 11 o'clock at night in that throwers weight room because we had one platform, It was hard, but it was worth it. Those guys were winning. Those girls were winning, man. And I didn't always enjoy it. And so looking back on that, I think it would have been a lot better, easier. Not easy is not a good word, but more enjoyable. Just enjoy it.
Yeah.
Doing hard things is a very good way of living, man. So enjoy what you do.
It fucking is. I mean, I wouldn't be where I am without doing hard things. I mean, I'm re-listening. We were on Dave Tate's Table Talk. We did it in October, and they just launched it this week. And I've been listening back to it, and it makes you really grateful for the hard times when you can relive them and realize, like, oh, like you wouldn't be here without the hard shit that you did. And it just reaffirms. We didn't get a chance to talk about Davidson Trained, but that's your new endeavor, online coaching. What's the goal with Davidson Trained?
I just like helping people, and there's been a lot of friends in the strength and conditioning business that coaches that say, "Hey, Cam, can you help me?" And there's been a lot of times where I say, "Absolutely, I'll write you a program." But there's a lot of those times where I'm like, I can't. I'm too busy. And so, we're all busy.
Yeah.
Total crap. And so it was one of those things where I'm like, you know what? I'm going to start this business because it gives me a means to be able to help these people better. So I love the app that I'm working with. I do work with Team Builder. They've been a fantastic company for me for a lot of years now. Just actually doing the work to set up Davidson Trained is a way for me to say, you know what? I've got this app. I've got the time. You need help, I can help you. And so it's just one of those things where it just continues, because I'm not doing Olympic lifts with hockey, right? So it's like, how do I let's help some people that want Olympic lift. It's a way for me to continue to be into those sports that I love, which is grappling and jujitsu and weightlifting. And I wanted that. I'm now I got 12 SWAT guys from the Springs that just joined. So I'm doing some of the tactical side of one of the guys. And how that happened was I trained jujitsu with one of the guys at my gym, and he goes, "Hey, will you help me?" I was like, "Absolutely. Just got this app." And before I would have been like, yeah, I can email you a program, but now it's like, yeah, I got the app. Go ahead and download it. We'll get you going tomorrow. And a lot of his tactical group, the SWAT guys, saw him working out and they're like, hey, I want a part of that. And so I just added them to the thing, and now I'm helping 10 SWAT guys. It's like it's just a really cool means to help. I'm about to help some of the Colorado Juniors volleyball girls, right? Just to stay plugged into volleyball and to help there. So that's why I like doing it. It just gives a nice means to help more professionally than I had in the past of just saying, hey, I'll text you a couple workouts, right?
I love it. I love it, man. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll have links to where everyone can find you in the show notes. But the last question I do have is if there was someone who you'd like to see on the podcast, but the caveat is you have to help me get them on the podcast, who would it be?
Mike Chapman.
Yeah.
Mike
Get me
Chapman,
in touch with Mike.
LSU basketball. I'm telling you, this dude has one of the biggest connections between how do I keep my athletes strong and fast, but how do I increase the efficacy of their movement to their foot and ankle, making them more athletic through that means. He's phenomenal on that side. He's a crazy good at functional movement, but never compromising being tough or strong or fast. Mike is a phenomenal coach. You'd love him.
Well, I met him when I was down visiting you.
Yep.
Yeah. 100%. Dude, thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for listening. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and we'll catch you on the next one.